welcome to a conversation on the future of Canada's public sector. I'm Derek Marinos, your host and moderator for today's show. Every year CGI engages with hundreds of leaders across Canada, listening to their priorities, ambitions, and the real challenges they face in a fast-changing world. We call it CGI's Voice of Our Clients. This research helps to guide us on how to serve our ecosystems, including public sector. What we hear shapes a powerful view of where governments are heading. Today, we're sharing some of those insights with you as a starting point for dialogue, leadership, and action. We'll explore 4 big themes: doing more with less, AI as a national advantage, building trust through talent, security, and sovereignty, and turning insights into real-world outcomes. To help us unpack all of this is a distinguished panel of subject matter experts who are actively shaping the future. Diane and Kelly, wonderful of you both to join us. Let's start with a quick introductions from each of you.
Great. I can go first if you like, Derek. Hi, everyone. My name is Diane Gucciu. I lead our global AI research area at CGI. I also have been doing quite a bit of advising globally on strategic policy related to AI, and in the co-chair on the Canadian Federal AI Council. So public sector adoption of AI and understanding AI literacy has been a real focus globally, not just in Canada, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Wonderful. Kelly.
Hi, everyone, and it's an honor to be here today, especially with Diane. Really looking forward to the conversation. I'm Kelly Scott. I'm the VP of Consulting Services. My focus and my team's focus is on public sector here in Ontario, so municipalities, provincial government, agencies, etc. I have been with CGI for 4 years, but I spent 15 plus years before that in public sector, which is why I am working now in the public sector space for CGI. So looking forward to the conversation.
Yes, I am as well. Thank you very much. And a welcome to all of our viewers as well. And a note to viewers, I'm not the only person with the privilege of asking questions here today. We would invite all of you to join the conversation, get in the chat and fire a question in there. And we'll try to get to as many as we can. Okay, let's begin. Our first block, we're talking about doing more with less. Now, governments at every level, they're facing rising expectations and constrained resources. But this is not simply a budget story. It's about rethinking how governments create value and deliver impact in a changing world. So our first question for the panel, how do you see the role of government evolving when expectations rise, but resources kind of tighten? And what new models or mindsets are emerging? Kelly, let's begin with your perspective, and we'll get to Diane afterwards.
Thank you. It's actually kind of ironic that the history of government using technology rarely has the citizenry even had an opinion or a concern. Nobody cared whether the government was using a SQL database or an Oracle database. Citizens are far more aware of AI, but they are either excited by its possibility or terrified by it, which is why I think we're seeing such a focus in government on trust, on digital sovereignty, on transparency, and ensuring you have the elimination of bias that could actually further marginalize some citizen groups. So as for government, it's always a balancing act, I think, and I think they're focused very much on policy and all of the elements that they need to control in order to ensure that they continue to have the trust of the citizenry while they're looking at technologies like AI to try to help them actually do more with less.
Right. Diane.
Yeah, we're at a point, whether the technology had advanced to support it or not, where the demand for more complex services, more personalized services, more streamlined services from the public sector, whether it's healthcare, social services, finance, the demand is the same. At the same time, we see, you mentioned not just budgets, but there definitely is a budget crunch. There's also a resource capacity crunch that is coming with the aging population in Canada and globally, right? So having a tool now that helps us do more with less is really, a huge advantage and an answer to the question to be able to continue to deliver services in the current state, as well as get prepared for the next 10 years when we see, the majority of baby boomers retiring. And how do we upskill people so that they're able to provide the services that we all want, assuming we on this call and our listeners are in that group of people retiring? How do we upskill? How do we retain that knowledge that we've all gathered across 30, 40 years of our careers so that we as citizens get the services and the care, the support that we need? So we're at a good time for this type of technology to come around to make it easier to access information. And that has been an absolute major theme anywhere I've gone, is using the tools to be able to do more with less. I think that's a great way of putting it, Derek.
Thank you. Now, it is an interesting way to frame it. And Kelly, within that theme, instead of asking, what can we cut? Because, there are a lot of fiscal challenges. What happens when governments start asking, what can we reimagine?
Yes, when governments ask what can we cut, the conversation shrinks. It becomes about subtraction, fewer programs, fewer services, fewer options, and it really signals to the citizens that the future is actually smaller than the past, and that the only path forward is restraint. But when governments ask what can we reimagine, things shift. Reimagining isn't about reduction; it's about redesign. And it invites us to look at a long-standing challenge with fresh eyes and challenge the assumptions that the way we've always done things is the way that we have to continue to do them. So when governments choose reimagination over reduction, a few things actually happen. First, we can unlock the latent potential in the system. Every government has processes that are decades old, technologies that no longer serve the public, workflows that are designed for a world that really doesn't exist anymore. But when we shift the question to reimagination, these aren't constraints. They actually become opportunities. Opportunities to digitize, to automate, to streamline, and to break down those silos and rebuild around the citizen experience rather than the government's departmental structure. Secondly, we stop focusing on scarcity and start focusing on impact. The problem isn't that governments don't have enough resources. The problem is that too many of those resources are trapped in those processes and policies and practices that really deliver diminishing returns. By reimagining service delivery, using data, human-centered design, unique partnerships, and agile approaches, it can deliver more value with the same dollar. And I know it sounds cliche, but by not squeezing harder, but by actually working smarter. And thirdly, we need to rebuild citizen trust. Citizens don't expect perfection. They expect responsiveness, clarity, empathy. When governments move from what do we cut to how do we make this better, it demonstrates something incredibly important, that the government sees the people it serves, and not just as cost burdens, but as partners in shaping a better society. Reimagination signals that government believes innovation isn't reserved for the private sector, that the public sector can also be inclusive and forward-looking. So I really think that the future of the public sector won't be defined so much by what we reduce. It'll be defined by how courageously we reimagine. What if we design government not for the past that we inherited, but for the future that we really want to create?
Well said. And creativity is going to be at the heart of that, of course. And Diane, what's an example of where reframing a challenge unlocked a new solution or accelerated an impact?
Yeah, I'm going to carry on from where Kelly was talking. We really need to rethink how we work. You're not going to get the value out of any technology, not just AI, if you just throw a tool at an old problem or an old process. And that's what makes it challenging, is how do you rethink a problem so that you're able to streamline and I hate to use the work smarter, but really streamline, remove the activities that maybe were legacy and aren't bringing value anymore. And that's a big part of what we need to look at, is where is the value. We also need to look at where to insert technology and AI versus where do we not want to insert technology and AI? Where do we as humans bring value to a workflow, as well as looking at the cost of services. What's the cost of consumption? What's the cost of the agent? And is it really a cost benefit of replacing an activity that right now is a human activity, as well as where do we bring our creativity? So an example, sorry, a long segue into an example.
No,
yeah, one of the areas that has one of the most legacy solution that has extended with the use of AI would be with BC Cancer. BC Cancer originally had put in a virtual assistant to be able to answer the quick questions to the public and to patients. The information is available on the website. And the intent of that, the problem they were trying to solve, was the capacity of the nurses and the contact center answering the questions so that the nursing staff could work to their skill, could answer the questions that really required a nurse. So things like, where do I park? What do I wear? What do I expect? All of that information could be facilitated through an AI tool. And we quickly learned, a lot of the time you may start with where do I park, but the question really does have a clinical follow-up. So the next phase of that was to add a live handoff. And this is something in all contact centers. If we have tier 0 for the agent can get you quick access so you're not searching web pages. People appreciate that, but they also appreciate the ability through that tool to say, no, I really actually need to talk to a person. And then continuing to extend, how do we add decision support? So again, a great use of AI and the current tools is to be able to give the agents that are on the support desk access to all of that wealth of knowledge, the training guides, the user manuals, the past incidents, so they can answer a question very quickly and come up to skill more quickly on the context of the question. So that's where generative AI and RAG model starts to come in. So applying the existing technology to what's the problem you're trying to solve, and then understanding how is that working and what are the needs of the end users to extend that and build in more technology. And a lot of the time, what we're seeing are not really AI problems, they're data integration problems. But that's another use case for AI to be able to make that easier.
What problem are you trying to solve? I keep hearing it time in and time out in every conversation we have, and it's fundamental and it's foundational. And I think it's the heart of what we're trying to get through here. And Kelly, speaking of problems to solve over the next 3 to 5 years, what must governments stop doing and start doing to stay resilient under this fiscal pressure they're facing?
I think a lot of governments are already going down the right path. They are looking at citizen journeys, life events, when somebody's born, when somebody dies, instead of simply automating outdated and silo processes. But I think they need to look at this more boldly and discover how the hierarchy and the organizational burdens are actually contributing to the delay in modernizing citizen services. And don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting, reshuffle program areas and rename a few ministries. We've watched governments year over year do that. All it does is actually cost months of lost time, while public servants just have to adapt to a new organizational structure instead of focusing on improved services. I'm talking about truly innovative restructuring of government, that those that have accountability also have the capability and the skills required to make decisions. This is where tools like artificial intelligence can truly be effective. There are tools that can be used to assess program changes, to research, to validate requirements, to support decision making at the highest level. Many governments have moved their delegation of financial authority right up to the most senior public servants, thinking this breeds accountability. But ironically, all it does is actually contribute to the red tape. It results in decisions not being made where the subject matter expertise lies, and where ultimate program area delivery accountability fails. Instead, dozens of, and forgive me for saying this, but marginally informed public servants who aren't really accountable to delivery, but they're empowered to cause delay as they're required to weigh in on and approve things before these things ever make it actually to the most senior public servants. So almost taking a reverse to decisions that have happened over the last 10 or 20 years and moving decision-making power back down to the lower levels of government where the subject matter experts actually are. Your most senior public servants, the world has gotten far more complex than it was 30 years ago, and they can't possibly be experts in everything. So I really think they can achieve more by moving that accountability back down to the public servants that are directly involved in the programs, know the needs of the citizenry, and know how to move quickly to make change.
Yeah, it's very powerful. Reimagining is a strong word, but also going back to somewhere to basics and where the knowledge is, and to trust the people there. Diane, did you want to weigh in on that before we move
No,
on?
I think Kelly's got a brilliant point. Going back to tools, I think we're at a point where we can streamline information and we can curate the right information to the right person to be able to support that at both levels. How can you get the information down the information pipeline, curated to the right person so that people are able to trust that information and make decisions, at all levels. And, just that simple adjustment of where you're gathering your insights, your information, and who is able to move things along in workflow approvals and so on, as Kelly was saying, really is part of the how do you reimagine and rethink how you work.
Yeah, no, for sure. And doing more with less, excuse me, isn't just about efficiency. It's about redefining how we solve problems as well. And increasingly, AI is at the center of that conversation and is no longer theoretical. It's reshaping service delivery, decision making, and the citizen experience as well. Canada has a unique moment to lead globally in scalable and responsible government AI. Diane, AI is often discussed as a disruptor, but what if it's also a leveler? I mean, how can it help smaller jurisdictions keep pace with larger ones?
Yeah, it's a great question. I looking at where to begin with it. Part of it, so on the first part of your comment about is it a disruptor or an enabler, a big part of that is our culture, and we need to define our culture. Are we going to stay risk adverse, or are we going to move to innovators in the public sector? And we're hearing a lot from the government on wanting to move the dial on being innovators, being able to take advantage of tools. And, I think that shifts the dial from just disruptor to a positive disruptor enabler to be able to get stuff done. Trust is going to be absolutely key to that. So leveling the play field and providing fairness and accessibility to information is really key. Where you have smaller jurisdictions that are trying to focus, or smaller departments, smaller agencies, giving them access to tools that allows them to keep pace, to have the same access to information is going to be really critical. If we're looking at public sector, making that accessibility to the tools evenly across it is going to be really critical. And what is the tool? What is the data? How do we have access? All of that needs to be solved. So I don't think it's an immediate answer to a question, but I do think it is an enabler to be able to do more. And it's absolutely critical. We look at where do we insert the tool into workflows, and what do we still need a human to do? What is that oversight? When you're using these tools, rather than spending all your time looking for information or entering information or re-entering information, that's really where that initial benefit is going to be. Those things that cause churn in our workflow, so that we're able to work to solving the problems rather than just finding the information to solve the problems. And that really will be step one in leveling that playing field.
An interesting point. And Kelly, that playing field, we were talking about also leadership on that playing field too. And what does leadership in government AI look like for Canada?
Well, I think first and foremost, AI leadership has to be a bipartisan issue. So many modernization initiatives fail because, quite frankly, a 4-year term is simply not enough time to make significant change in government, in their operating models, and still deliver the services that citizens are expecting. So I think it looks like a country that uses AI not to replace public service. I mean, we all hear that phrase, human in the loop, and it is so critical. But re-equipping the public service, a country that can point to 3 to 5 years from now that to concrete examples where AI has actually made services faster, decisions fairer, trust stronger, because we choose responsibility, transparency, and equity from day one. Leadership will not be measured by how much AI we deploy. It'll be measured by whether Canadians can say, my government is using AI for me, not on me. I am able to, get the services that I need in the time that I need them in a most efficient and effective way.
Yeah, and I'm just going to jump in on that, Kelly. Human in the loop, we hear that all the time. And we assume that means that every interaction with AI, someone's going to review it before it goes out. And that's not always practical. Going back to the BC Cancer virtual assistant, we don't stand in front of every single, where do I park? Hang on, let me check. I'm giving you the right answer. So you also have to consider it as oversight, human on the loop. So it doesn't mean that we interject a human into everything. The other area where I hear a lot of churn is, if I have to check the source of every single response, it's no longer helpful. So those are the sorts of things that we need to automate to be able to get that oversight. But you're absolutely right of, it's not how many agents are out there, how much, and I mean AI agents, how many of these tools have we rolled out? It's what's the value? Did we get the intended benefit for implementing this? If it's a call center, did we reduce the amount of time waiting on calls? Did we get people the right answer? Do we have citizen satisfaction and user satisfaction, operator satisfaction? So all of those things I think are really critical. And coming back to value, did we get the return on investment for this tool or these tools? And are we using them in a way that is providing value to those that we serve?
Interesting perspective. Very interesting. And that's a really good tag on that, Diane. And I'll come back to you, Diane, with this question as well. In the vein of, how do you prioritize AI investment when fiscal realities are tight, but the demand for innovation is rising?
Well, the same as any software. You're not going to put in a new software solution without doing a business case against it. The same needs to happen to some extent on the type of tools. We've had that conversation even internally. Does everyone need one of these high price licenses, or based on your role, would one of these free licenses work? Is it protected enough? Is the answer accurate enough? And is it actually going to serve you? So understanding, building in all of our best practices and change management is really critical. How are you going to use it? What are you using it for? And is it going to provide value into your workflow? Is it reliable, robust, secure, privacy? All of those things need to be built in. Is no different than any other software. The thing that's different about AI is it's helping us make decisions. It's getting us access to information. So is it doing it well, reliably, robustly, securely? And then are we getting the output that we expected? Are we changing things for the better? Is it cost effective? All of those questions need to be asked.
Very much so. Diane, we do have a question from audience, and Ben, thank you for the question. Here it is. How do you fight against hallucinations when delivering information that could be mission critical?
Yeah, I have an analogy, and apologies to my CGI colleagues because I use this one a lot. And it came from my team quite a long time ago, before generative AI was a thing, is we need to consider our information and data the same way we consider our water, right? You turn on your drinking tap and that water is trustworthy because even if you don't understand how it works, that there are regulations, processes, and the water is curated to you in a way that it's safe. And if it's not safe, you're going to get a notice saying it's not safe. We need to get the same with our information. We need to be sure that it's coming from a safe source, that it's curated in a way that nothing is changing, that is going to impact it being safe for use for mission critical. And we need to continue to improve our information so that we can trust it. So transparency, reliability, quality, all of these things are really important. So, with the tools, some of the challenge with generative AI tools right now is it's a black box. If we were developing data science algorithms and models for traditional AI, we train it on the source of information. We test the ability to return a quality answer. And we have some limitations in generative AI black boxes to be able to do that. However, when you think of the generative AI agent tools as a service rather than as a tool on its own, and point that tool at your own information. So let it know you can only answer from this source of information. And then in agentic models, we're starting to see really great progress in being able to use agentic models to implement our responsible use framework. So having a quality agent, did the information come from the right source, and scoring the quality of the response so that for mission critical, I know this is a safe answer to a question. It came from the right source. It calculated it correctly, is presented it correctly, right? And that's the sort of things that we can start to automate with agentic solutions so that we're getting better to answers to questions. The other thing that's absolutely critical is, how we ask the question is really important to the output. Don't just do a one of. What is the best Italian restaurant in Montreal? Have a conversation with the data the same way you would go down your Google search. Is this in the area? Is this child friendly? Are there gluten-free options? And have a conversation with the tool. Don't be afraid to ask the tool, is this correct? Is this the most current information? Are you missing anything? And it will help you get to a better answer. But for mission critical, you want to make sure you have validated that answer the same way as if you sent a bunch of co-op students off to do the work. Think of your AI as co-op students. Depending on how mission critical it is, I'm going to have a lot more oversight on the outcome and did I get the right answer to the question before I use that for a mission critical answer.
Challenge. I think it's the most important thing, so you can get to a very nice cup of water.
Peer reviewing is really important with AI. Think of it as peer reviewing any report that you put out, any answer to a question, depending on how critical it is. No different than if your team of interns or co-op students did that work for you.
Yeah, like a good news editor as well. I think it's fundamental and it's important. Okay, final question for our second block here, and I'm going to ask for input from both of you on this one. What factors will determine whether Canada becomes a leader or a follower in public sector AI over the next 5 years? Diane, let's begin with your perspective, and then we'll get Kelly's take on it.
Oh, it's a big question. I think driving this from the top is important, and we're hearing from governments at all levels that we want to move forward. We need to set our culture. Traditionally, public sector is risk adverse for good reason. We have an unprecedented responsibility to citizens to protect their information, to make sure that systems are secure and that we're providing really good services. And this introduces a new tool that we need to do the same level of rigor on. And that means that we tend to move slowly. So how can we accelerate? We need to invest in that. We need to invest in being able to roll these tools out, get access, and understand how to use them best for the best value. And a big part of that is culture. We have to shift our culture. If we look at what other jurisdictions have done, AI literacy is critical. We need, in order to use these tools, we need to make sure we understand what they are and what they're not. And we need to make sure the citizens we're serving understand what they are and are not. And that's just, the foundation of what we need to do to be able to then invest and do more. The second area is we have a fantastic research base across Canada. We're, a global leader in our research. And, we've got some amazing thought leadership and think tanks across the country. Leveraging these to be able to move the dial on Canadian AI, everything from AI compute through to models through to infrastructure is going to be really critical to be a leader. I hear a lot that we are behind, but I can tell you nobody really is ahead unless you are with one of the big industry hyperscalers. The use of the tools in public sectors, we hear globally from our clients and voice of the client that everyone feels that they have a lot of pilots that are not moving into production. That's part of moving the dial as well, is opening up that floodgate so the high value use cases are getting implemented.
Yeah, really good point, Kelly.
Wow, I don't think there's much left. I think Diane really touched on all of it. I think we're going to talk about a few other topics, and we've already touched on just we need to think more innovatively. We need to really question the way government has operated And as Diane said, we've got an incredible research base across this country. There are so many ways for governments to tap into resourcing and capabilities, but we have to step away from those typical models that they use for expanding their resource pool. And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges is government needs to stop thinking it has to do everything with a very fixed group of public servants. As Diane said, a lot of them are going to retire. We are going to have a major brain drain within all governments, really, across Canada. So we really do now need to think more innovatively about how to resource to deliver public services in Canada.
Yeah, no, really good point. And as we get to, one of the third points that were revealed out of our voice of our clients, I think it's important when we're looking at leadership, but more importantly, if we can only be sustained kind of if governments have trust, talent, and sovereignty to support it. I mean, you touched on it a bit there, Kelly, and digital trust is the cornerstone of modern government, but talent shortages, cyber, and sovereignty concerns are testing how governments maintain citizen confidence while scaling digital services. It's clear digital trust is fragile. And Diane, what does it really take to earn and sustain that trust at scale?
Literacy. It really truly is. Not everybody understands how these tools work. They're not magic. They're just math. They're tools. They're not sentient beings on their own, right? And it sounds funny to say it, and then to a lot of listeners, I'm sure you've heard that conversation before. So we are still at the point in the technology that it is just a tool, that we have control over how this is going to develop, how it's going to evolve, and how we're going to use it. And I think that's critical, that we do that in the right way. I don't know, Kelly, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, no, sure. No, because there are talent shortages, Kelly, forgive me, my unmute got stuck, are top of mind across jurisdictions. I mean, what new models, partnerships, augmentation, reskilling can close the gap?
Fabulous question, because it really is. Talent shortages are probably one of the biggest worry that public sector organizations are going to have to grapple with. And it is, talent capability, that's the cornerstone of modern government, but it's really under pressure. So how do we close the gap? As I said earlier, we need to think differently about how things are resourced. Firstly, I think we have to shift away from hiring talent in these distributed to more distributed talent models. And what I mean by that is, governments are never going to be outbid by the private sector for AI engineers and cyber experts, but they can create shared talent pools across departments. And we're even seeing this already in some governments where they're consolidating their resourcing rather than it being, fractional roles that people are doing across, the same government. You got 20 IT shops. That's not going to be highly effective. So really looking at centralizing those resources. Secondly, we can augment the workforce we already have. AI can give every public servant digital strength, tools that can help summarize legislation, analyze risk, triage cases, translate instantly, or detect anomalies that don't replace people, they extend them. So the future public service doesn't need to be bigger, but as Diane said, literacy is so critical. It needs to be more capable. Thirdly, we have to build strategic partnerships. And I know this is going to sound very self-serving, working for a company like CGI, but it really is critical. It's not about procurement contracts. You've got universities, private sector companies, we've got Indigenous partners, we've got nonprofits, all who can help government to co-develop digital platforms to strengthen cybersecurity readiness and to build long-term pipelines of talents. These partnerships have to include meaningful knowledge transfer. We see it now. We obviously have lots of contracts with many governments. We're starting to see more of the, contracted requirement to do knowledge transfer, which we always do anyways. But it is really important to understand that not just the public servants, can be the ones that we transfer knowledge to. We can be working with universities and university students and organizations. Um, so I think that's the third of the things. And then the last is going to be probably the most challenging, but reskilling at scale. I'm sure training budgets are probably the smallest budgets in most governments, and that only sets governments further behind. Canada has thousands and thousands of public servants who could thrive in digital, cyber, AI, and data roles, but reskilling has to come in order for them to be able to deliver effectively in the roles that they're in. And that, of course, also when you talk about change management, means you have to look at job classifications, you have to look at career pathing, and it's very difficult to do that in a public sector organization, but it is a mind shift and quite frankly a budget shift that we need to allocate those funds to be able to reskill at scale. You simply can't have a tiny little group of people that actually understand AI. That literacy needs to exist across the public service, not just in the technology departments.
Yeah, that's a great, and it's a key takeaway. I think it's fundamental, and again, it's foundational. We do have another question from audience. Christian, thank you for the question, and here it is. The controls for future AI use sound great, but people are already using LLMs, or large language models, in mission critical situations. Pharmacists, doctors, developers, lawyers, etc. Are all relying heavily on these tools, AI tools specifically. How do we curb this over-reliance? And Diane, I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm going to use a bit of a story here. As you know, I like to do, Derek. We need to shift our thinking. And here's the example. My son is in third year university. So he's my perfect case study for someone who moved into a new world in the world of AI assistance tools, general purpose AI, generative tools. And in this first year of university, everything had to be written by hand, because if you use generative AI, you're cheating. So his papers were written by hand. His exam was written by hand. He complained about the little bump in his finger that us old people all remember from taking notes. And the assumption was, if you use these tools, you're cheating. Second year university, he was allowed to go digital, but there was still a comment on, we are now able to see your keystrokes in your Google Docs. We now know what you're doing. We have tools in our plagiarism tools that can tell us if you've used these tools. And if you use these tools, you're cheating. Third year university is when the dial shifted, and I have a lot of hope now. And it was, please go off and use the tool of your choice to do your policy analysis. Go in and come back and give me your report on what the policy analysis, let me know the tool you used, and then in big bold letters, that is not your assignment. We are going to take that, and I'm going to teach you how to peer review. I am going to teach you how to find more current sources. I am going to teach you how to launch research from existing knowledge. And this is an undergraduate course. So they are now using this tool for graduate level, launching new research from existing sources. So the moral to the story is the tools are out there, and we need to realize that it's inevitable. People will be using the tools. We also need, as a culture, to decide it is not cheating to be more efficient. To send us back in our day into a paper-based library to go find our research sources when it's available on Google Scholar would have been ridiculous. And it's similar to what we're seeing now. We need to shift our thinking from, if I use these tools, I'm cheating, to I need to be a critical thinker in the time of AI assist tools. I need to be able to use this to find the information, to maybe word things better, but I can't take myself out of the loop. The human needs to still be involved in this, because AI is great at answering questions. It's not great at thinking of the next question. It does not have the context. It does not have the empathy. It does not have the creativity to be able to insert what we need to insert, but it is really great at answering the questions. So the moral to the story is, people are using the tools. Now we need to guide them to use the tools in a way that they are assisting them, not replacing them.
Wonderful response. Thank you very much. And again, human on the loop, human it's got to be there driving it. Fascinating how that is accelerating at the academic level, that at a younger ages they're already getting into the graduate or even graduate dojos, and I think that's really important and critical for learning too. Thank you for sharing. Okay, next question for both of us. And Christian, thank you for the question. Much appreciated. How is the concept of digital sovereignty, this is really important here too, influencing decisions on infrastructure, platforms, and partnerships? Kelly, we'll start with you, and then Diana, I'd love to get your feedback on that too.
So I think there's a number of factors. Sorry, my brain just went mush for a second there. My apologies. Digital sovereignty is something that all governments have to be aware of. I'm actually going back to the question that Christian asked earlier about people are relying on AI tools. You don't want to curb that. What you need to do is make sure that you control the tools that they are going to rely on, especially important in public service. You don't want everybody just going out. There's hundreds of AI tools on the market, free ones. You don't want people just going out and using them. That's why it actually is imperative for governments. And as Diane said, even at university level, they've already recognized these aren't cheating tools. These are tools that can truly enhance their ability to be able to deliver. So it really becomes important for government to actually ensure that they are providing those tools, especially as young folks are coming into the public service. They already have this experience that Diane's son has. And so not giving them that capability is problematic, which is why they need to provide the right tool sets, understand the needs of the program areas. You know, policy needs something different than your healthcare, your Ministry of Health or your Ministry of Transportation is actually going to need. But it is really important, first and foremost, for governments to establish the standards that they're going to follow for assessing tools, ensuring as much as possible that they are focused on, onshore tool sets. We hear a lot about how the hyperscalers are focused on ensuring that Canada has access to cloud capabilities that truly are within our borders. So I think that that digital sovereignty, if you will, that digital trust, is something that governments obviously have to stay focused on, and really reaching out to people like Diane, who sits on the AI Council, to help guide and put those guardrails in place so that governments can get moving and get those tools in to enable the public servants to work more effectively.
Thank you, Kelly. I do appreciate it. We do have another question from audience.
Actually, sorry, can I just weigh in on the sovereignty one first?
Oh, please, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. We'll get
I don't want to lose that because
yeah.
I think what's critical is we need to define what we mean by sovereignty. You know, data residency has been a concept we've had for a long time. And why we're talking more about sovereignty is data residency became important when the Patriot Act came out after 9/11, where we want to make sure that our data resides in Canada. Any movement of that data stays in Canada. Any data that's cached stays in Canada. Certainly in healthcare, for example, in finances, where we really want to protect the data. Sovereignty opens up another can of worms. And I'm not sure that we all have the same understanding. You know, and is it a black and white? Sovereignty means everything is built in Canada, maintained in Canada, supported in Canada, controlled by Canada. You know, and are we big enough? Have we advanced fast enough that we're able to be a leader if we have an absolute, pure mandate for 100% made in Canada, built in Canada solution? So my suggestion when we think about sovereignty is we need to think about, first of all, what is it we absolutely need to protect? Data, IP, thought leadership, talent, others, what is it we're willing to give up for a benefit? You know, is there a model that is going to bring us great benefit in public sector that we can safely use? And then how do we make that safe? How do we make sure that we have control over those things we need to protect, that we are collaborating with an organization that is going to work with us? And the Cloud Act has opened up some questions related to even if we have data residency, is that data truly protected if we're working with a non-Canadian company? And then how do we then protect, right? So I worry that we all have a different idea of what we mean by sovereignty. And I think that's something that we really, as a country, need to talk about. What is it we need to protect, and how do we move the dial forward? How do we work with foreign talent, foreign investment into Canada to be able to advance?
Because the answers to those questions you're talking about are really going to lead us to the solutions. The infrastructure, especially, and how that is defined will determine, the road we take. There are a lot of discussions there, and there are also some discussions too about chips, the actual infrastructure, whether it's going to be here in 3 to 5 years, how much of it will be here. I mean, the globalization and where it's going right now. There are a lot of questions, and Diane, it's a great point. I think as a country we need to come together and find what is most important to us in order to move forward with a safe and secure way to do this. Okay, as mentioned, we got a question from audience. This one's from Ben. What tools are you seeing out there to be able to get the best out of prompt engineering?
Yeah, and my answer to that question is it's a point in time, right? These tools are advancing so quickly. What I would have said the best was last week is not the same this week and won't be the same next week. When it comes to prompt engineering, that really is our side of the AI equation. How we prompt, the context we give the prompt, the type of question, the level of detail. You can prompt just to say, what are the best 5 restaurants in Montreal? And then you can say, I am a food critic and I'm only eating vegan food. What are the best 5 restaurants? Please put that in a table, put it in the order of priority, and let me know why. Right? And you can use your prompt to get a better answer to a question. When it comes to the tools, I think there's great training on prompt engineering. The tools are changing so rapidly. They're all getting better, and they're all starting to address the types of uses that we have and the challenges they had 2 years ago. So answering which is the best tool would be near impossible. I know I've got my favorites, but it's because that's what you provided the context and you're able to trust, right? For different purposes, not always the same favorite for the same purpose.
No, very much so. And that's really interesting. Moving along now, trust and talent are what make transformation possible, but insight alone isn't enough. What matters most is turning those insights into outcomes. I think that's really important. Public sector leaders across Canada are generating powerful insights, but the next frontier is about moving from strategy to execution, from pilots to scale, from ideas to citizen impact. And with that in mind, Kelly, what are the most common barriers and how can leaders overcome them?
So public sector leaders across Canada have no shortage of insights. Honestly, the real challenge, as you said, is moving from strategy to execution, from pilots to real citizen impact. And the barriers actually are quite consistent across all organizations. Firstly, pilots don't scale. Teams run these great experiments, but they stall when legacy systems and funding cycles and governance gets in the way. So I think step one is to ensure that scalability is built in from the start. Shared platforms, enterprise standards, and clear paths to adoption. Secondly is siloed ownership. And when we talk about government structure and their operating models, everyone owns a piece of the problem, but no one actually owns the whole problem or the full citizen experience. So it becomes really important, again, to flatten governance and establish these cross-departmental delivery mandates, aligning incentives around shared outcomes and not typical historic organizational boundaries. The third is outdated procurement. Traditional contracting can't keep pace with modern technology. And I know it's a challenge that government has been trying to overcome for a very long time, but moving to more modular outcome-based procurements and long-term capability partnerships, where it's not 12 requirements that have to be delivered, but it's a trusted partner that you can then tap into for whatever outcomes you're trying to achieve. And then we talked about, of course, talent constraints. Teams are stretched thin and they're juggling their operational loads. So, a lot of the things we talked about earlier on how to reskill, how to look for alternate resourcing, how to centralize, but then also augment with AI. AI can remove a lot of the burdensome workload that many public servants simply have to deal with on a day to day basis. And then Diane talked about the last point, which is really around culture. Government often avoids failure, understandably, instead of enabling progress. So um, they need to enable a safe to try kind of environment where small iterative releases that build on confidence and momentum become sort of the standard way of operating instead of these big monumental, major modernization initiatives, big bang implementations. So that's my sort of summary on what I think that they can do to try to overcome
Good.
some of those barriers.
Thank you, Kelly. Diane, where do you see technology act as an enabler of real outcomes, not just a buzzword?
Yeah, and you've heard me say this one before. My own little buzz is we need to stop talking about AI and start talking
Yep.
about the types of problems that we can solve with this new tool in our toolkit. I think in order to do that, we talked earlier about AI literacy. We need a common understanding of what these tools are, what they're not, and what they're able to help us with, and then make very wise investments on how we're going to insert them into what we do. And the key is value. Where is the most value I'm going to get from this tool, and how am I going to enable that to provide the value? So, to me, it absolutely is critical as an enabler of being able to do all of the things that we need to do in public service to support citizens, whether it's healthcare, social services, finances, all of those things, and the huge amount of demand and capacity and streamlining can be supported by these tools, as well as the data that underlies these tools. And I don't want to limit that. The other thing I would say is, we spend a lot of time worrying about the risk and talking about the risk of AI, but we already have fantastic, well thought out legislation we can lean on. We have privacy laws, so we need to make sure that AI that we use abides by that. And we need to understand what's the difference in this tool that we maybe need to add a layer onto our existing legislation. But don't reinvent the wheel. We have the ability to still curate information to the right person, protect the information, and then make sure that information is reliable through technology. And that's where you're going to get value.
That sets it up really nice, and it brings us to our final question of this conversation. It's been great, and you talk a bit about value, and I think it's important, how citizens can see and feel it. So for both of you, Kelly, we'll start with you. How can governments ensure citizens feel the impact of innovation in their daily lives?
Well, I'm going to take kind of an interesting approach to answering this question because I actually truly believe, and it's a passion I had in government and now that I've left, and that is governments really need to start focusing, I believe, on building a shared government services platform, a common digital backbone that all municipalities can use, that all departments can use. I mean, as the vendor community, we see all of the procurements that are happening, and everybody's buying everything and all different things to achieve the same outcomes. And in many cases, sometimes these smaller organizations don't even know what to ask for or how to ask for it. Cybersecurity being an example right at the top of the list. So I really think a shared platform will flip the model. It provides secure, reusable building blocks, identity, payments, messaging, case management, data sharing, and quite frankly, responsible AI. If you only have to build it all in there once, you don't end up with 50 different examples that all have to be secured across the province or across the country. I really believe that impact could be enormous. Plus, citizens, regardless of geography, will finally get a consistent, trustworthy experience. So it doesn't matter where you are in the province or in Canada, north, south, major city, rural area, you should have the same digital experience and the same enablement of those digital experiences with tools like AI. But if you try to buy 50, you're never going to be able to do it successfully. So I really believe that a digital platform that gets tapped into by multiple organizations helps enable those citizen services, standardize them for all of the citizens, regardless of geography, and then maybe even more importantly, make cybersecurity a reality that it can protect that environment. Again, you buy 1,000 things, you need to secure 1,000 things. If we build a single platform for many government services, it becomes much, much easier to apply cybersecurity and ensure that everything is protected. So for me, that's the thing I would love to see governments take a really serious look at.
Thank you, Kelly. Diane?
Okay, I get to answer this in two ways. The first would be for enabling services. You know, our government, our public sector is there to make sure that we have access to the services, access to the information that we need. And it should be invisible. So in order to do that, think back to your drinking water. I would say a very small part of our population understands how the water gets from wherever it gets to my tap. But I can trust that somebody knows and that it's protected, it's secure, it's safe, right? And that I have communication if it's not. We need to provide services and leverage it. And in order to do that, we need to, again, I keep coming back to AI literacy. People have to understand what it is. And I believe it will eventually be invisible to us. So that's what we need to do. It needs to be an enabler. It needs to be something that's used in the right place. People need to trust it, and it needs to be reliable. The second side of this, though, we have a huge opportunity right now to become a leader in a number of areas in this AI evolution, revolution, whatever you want, a transformation, you know, whether it's AI compute, quantum solutions, small language models, which we, you know, I won't dive deep into it, but, you know, focused industry use case specific models. And we've got fantastic think tanks across Canada, Mila, Vector Institute, Amy, you know, we've got fantastic universities with brilliant teams that are doing amazing things in research. You know, we need to leverage those and get those tools, those outcomes, those ideas to the point that they are generating growth for Canada, generating revenue or commercialized, to be able to move that dial. So understanding where to focus on that and how to advance that, you know, is how we're going to use AI for growth and revenue and prosperity in Canada. So two sides to it. Should be invisible for our daily use, should be an area where we take the lead.
Wonderful insights. Thank you both. It's been truly a privilege and a pleasure to be engaging with both of you. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. Transformation doesn't happen in isolation, of course. It happens when we work together across governments, partners, and communities. CGI is proud to stand alongside Canada's public sector in designing solutions that deliver real outcomes for citizens. We invite you to keep the conversation going through collaboration, co-creation, and shared leadership to ensure Canada's public sector remains a global benchmark for innovation and trust. And to keep up to date, we are inviting you to join our CGI Public Sector Insights quarterly newsletter. To do so, please scan the QR code on the screen. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Really appreciate it. Hope to see you soon. Bye for now.
Thank you.